Wow. Well, let's let our sheriffs get up here. I'm proud to be flanked by a number of great law enforcement leaders in the state of Georgia because we're here today to celebrate law enforcement and to celebrate a president who has stood with law enforcement, and that's Donald J. Trump. Now, we ought to remember here that we have the best country in the world. We got the best workers in the world. We've got the best people in the world. We've got the most beautiful and most abundant natural resources in the world. But the one thing that we have got to do to fix this country is fix the leadership. Because as much as we've got incredible blessing and incredible bounty, we have got a screwed up vice president calling the shots. And I think it's time to fire Kamala Harris, not to give her a promotion. Now, I don't know if you saw yesterday, but her VP nominee, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, gave a little speech at the Democratic National Convention. I will say I appreciate the Democrats not being able to keep anything on time because I think by the time that he spoke, everybody in the state of Georgia was already in bed. And if you weren't asleep at the beginning of the speech, you were sure as hell asleep by the end of the speech. Ain't that right? But look, it's interesting that they are running, trying to pretend to be tough on crime people. Kamala Harris says that she's now tough on crime. She's got religion. She found Jesus about being tough on crime, and she found it about a month ago when Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race. Because the record of Kamala Harris and the record of her running mate is doing everything they can to make the lives of our law enforcement harder, to make it harder for them to keep our communities safe. Kamala Harris was the prosecutor in San Francisco, California. And if you think San Francisco, California has been well run from a tough on crime perspective, then I've got another thing to tell you. One of the most, by the way, a beautiful city, San Francisco, California, has been destroyed by the leadership of people like Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris wants to take San Francisco liberalism nationwide, and I think we are not going to let her. Georgia is not going to let her, and it starts right here in Valdosta. Now, let's just run through the contrast a little bit, the difference between Kamala Harris's record on law enforcement and Donald Trump's record. Now, Kamala Harris, she wanted to make sex crimes with minors a nonviolent offense, which means more of these sickos out on the streets of our country. Do we want that? Absolutely not. Kamala Harris wanted to defund the police. She said it on video. Do we want to defund the police? Kamala Harris wants to make it easier for soft-on-crime prosecutors to go after our law enforcement. Do we want that? So do we want Kamala Harris as the prosecutor-in-chief of this country? No, we want Donald J. Trump, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, as Kamala Harris was doing all those things, let's remember the record of Donald J. Trump. When Kenosha, Wisconsin, which I was at just a few days ago, Kenosha, Wisconsin was about to burn in a terrible riot. Donald Trump called the governor and affirmatively offered the help of federal officials to stop those riots and to save the city of Kenosha. Donald Trump believes that we ought to properly fund our law enforcement and make sure our police get the pay and the equipment that they need. Donald Trump believes that we ought to stop these soft-on-crime prosecutors. If the police bring in a bad guy, the prosecutors ought to throw him behind bars and keep him there. And most importantly, Donald Trump believes that we ought to make our law enforcement lives easier by closing down that southern border and getting the drug cartels out of our communities. Now, I have to say that Kamala Harris, given that she's so into soft-on-crime policy, she did select a good running mate in Tim Walz. They make quite a dynamic duo. If you remember the riots of summer of 2020 when $13 billion of damage was done to the city of Minneapolis, Tim Walz was the governor of Minnesota, and Tim Walz did everything he could to let those rioters burn down the biggest city in his state. And then Kamala Harris did everything she could to bail out the rioters out of prison, right? What a dynamic duo they make. A dynamic duo for people who don't like law enforcement, a dynamic duo for people who want to make our streets less safe. I happen to believe in a very common sense principle that we're going to back the blue and bring public safety back to Georgia and back to our country. Now, Tim Walz, I will say, I've been beating up on Tim Walz a little bit. You may have seen this, but Tim Walz loves to go around and say that he carried a weapon in war. That's what Tim Walz says. And of course, all of the veterans out there will know that Tim Walz never carried a weapon in war. The closest he went to a war zone was Italy, which last time I checked was not a war zone. But in Tim Walz's defense, he did let those rioters burn down Minneapolis, so maybe we should give Tim Walz a little bit of credit. Maybe the combat zone he visited was Minneapolis when he was the governor of Minnesota. But let's hear now from a great leader in Georgia law enforcement, and I just want to make sure I get Ashley's name right here, but we have a great sheriff in Ashley Polk who has made this community safer. Thank you. And I know he already offered a few words, but Sheriff, if you would, come up and just say a few more words about why we got to back law enforcement. Here's Sheriff Ashley Polk. Give him a round of applause.
Kind of a tough job to follow a real Marine that went to a real war with a real gun. I mean, tough act to follow. As I said earlier, I said you couldn't find a better pair than we've got to save this country. They're very much pro-law enforcement, and y'all know how I feel about that, because we're there to work together with them. But we have got to get out and get these people elected, because it's the most important election I've ever been in my life. It's not even me on the ballot, but I want to. By the way, I did not recognize the person that can really get elected. Where's my wife of 57 years? That's who's always got me elected. Ginger, thank you for all you do. And you will be working for the party. But let's all get together and get out and work and carry your neighbors to the polls, and because this is the last chance to save America we'll ever have. If we don't do it this time, we're going to lose it. Thank y'all.
Well, thank you so much, Sheriff, and thanks to your lovely wife for doing what you do. And look, it's very simple here. We have an ability to make this country much safer than it is today. We just need better leadership. We need better leadership at the federal level in particular, because it's the federal government that opened up the southern border and let all these drug cartels bring the drug and crime into our communities. And we're here, of course, not far from where Laken Riley was born and raised. A beautiful, beautiful young girl who would still be alive today if Kamala Harris had done her job and not let these drug cartels come into our community. And I'm proud, and I know President Trump is proud, to have been endorsed by local law enforcement here in Georgia, but we also got some good endorsements in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Law enforcement knows that Donald J. Trump is the law and order candidate in this election, and you all have an incredible power to get out the vote, to drive people to the polls, and make sure he actually becomes the next president of the United States. So thank you all for everything that you're doing. Now, I want to take a few questions from the media, but before I take some questions from the press, I want to get a little bit personal here, because the sheriffs here did something for me that I've actually never seen. They took me in to the investigation room and showed me some of the stuff that they have interdicted over the last few months just here in this community. What Valdosta is what, 50,000 people? Small town Georgia, you would not think is so close to the poison that the drug cartels are bringing into this country, but every town is a border town, and every state is a border state because of the policies of Kamala Harris. Now, you've got sheriffs behind me who are doing everything they can to keep our communities safer, but they need a federal government that makes their job easier and not harder. And I got to tell you, I've got three little kids. I've got a 7-year-old boy, a 4-year-old boy, and a 2-year-old girl. And what they showed me were boxes of candy that looked like nerds, looked like Sour Patch Kids, looked like Snickers bars, and they're boxes of candy that are actually dangerous drugs. And why did the drug cartels manufacture them like that? Because they wanted to hide them from law enforcement. And we know what's going to happen is if a pack of that candy finds its way into our communities or into our playgrounds, some kid, through no fault of their own, is going to pick up a piece of candy, and it is going to take their lives from them. And I don't want that to be my child, and I don't want it to be your child either. And that's why we have to fight to change leadership in this election. Think about how sick you would have to be to manufacture drugs that look like children's candy, and think about how sick Kamala Harris has to be to let those people do business in our country instead of throwing them the hell out of our country, which is exactly what we should be doing. This is a disgrace, ladies and gentlemen. This is a disgrace born of our own failed leadership, and we can do so much better. You know, one of my favorite speeches at the RNC convention, well, my most favorite speech was my wife's speech. I thought she did a hell of a job. Thank you. But beyond my wife's, one of my most favorite speeches, and it was a sad speech. She had a beautiful young mother talking about her handsome young kid, and he was maybe 14 years old. And this kid lost his life because he took something that he shouldn't have taken, but it was laced with fentanyl. And I remember watching this mom speak. And I remember thinking to myself that don't we want our kids to grow up in communities where they can make the mistakes that all kids make and they can learn from it rather than have it become a death sentence? Because we all know, we either have kids, all of us were kids at one point in our life. We all know that kids are going to get into stuff that parents and grandparents don't want them to get into. That's just a part of growing up in this country. But when I grew up, even though I grew up in a poor family, though I grew up in a neighborhood that wasn't always easy, I knew that if I made a mistake, the people around me had mistake that wouldn't take my life. And that's what the policies of Kamala Harris have taken from our children and taken from our neighborhoods. We have got to get back to the kind of country where kids can make childhood mistakes, and the Mexican drug cartels are not going to be there to take advantage of them. And I think that's what this election is ultimately about. We know that kids aren't always going to be perfect, but let's build the kind of Georgia. Let's build the kind of country where our kids can learn and grow. We're going to do it together, but only if you get us across the finish line in Georgia. This is one of the most important states in the union. It always has been, but especially in this election of 2024. So my request is very simple. Do everything you can. Get your friends and family and your neighbors to the polls. Remind that person who sometimes votes but sometimes doesn't that it's their time to get to the polls in 2024 and vote for Donald Trump. If you got a little extra time, thank you. If you got a little time, go down to the GOP headquarters, knock on some doors, make some phone calls. The people who determine whether Donald J. Trump becomes the next president, it's not the media, it's not the dishonest leadership of the Democratic Party, it is us. Donald Trump is the people's president, but only if we do the work to make it so. God bless you guys. Let's get to work. We got 75 days to make Donald J. Trump the next president, and we're going to do it together. God bless you all. Thank you. Now, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Now, let's take some questions from the media, and here's what I'd ask. First of all, if it's a fake news anchor, I'd appreciate y'all just letting them ask their question. It's okay. We can run them out of town after they ask their question. I'm kidding. But what I'd ask, first of all, is we start with local Georgia reporters because we want to make sure that the local reporters get an opportunity to ask some questions. We'll take a few from local reporters, and then we'll take a few from the national press pool, and then we'll go from there. So where we got local Georgia reporter, throw your hand in the air, and I'll call on you. Yes, sir. The question was, what are some policies that are going to affect rural America and certainly rural South Georgia? And I think, look, the first and most important thing is rural America has been affected by this terrible poison the drug cartels are bringing in as much as anybody. We have got to close down the border and stop the cartels from bringing this poison into our communities. We've got to re-implement basic law and order and public safety policies because, look, I believe whether you live in a big city or a small rural area, whether you're black or white, rich or poor, public safety is the birthright of every American citizen. And if we do that, rural America is going to benefit more than anybody else. And the final point that I'll make is, look, we know that our rural areas, our schools are overstressed and sometimes underfunded. Our local hospitals don't have enough resources. We've seen massive closures in rural hospitals over the past few years in this country. What makes rural hospitals not financially viable? It's when you bring in millions of illegal aliens into your country and you give them free health care paid for by American taxpayers. I want American citizens to benefit from our great healthcare system, and I want American taxpayers to support their fellow countrymen, not people who don't deserve to be here in the first place. Ma'am.
Good afternoon, Senator Vance.
Thank you. I can hear you. Yep.
How do you respond to Democrats who say that they have tried unsuccessfully on Capitol Hill to pass a border security bill, and that in fact it's been Trump and Republicans who held it up?
Yeah, ma'am, I appreciate that question. And for those of you who couldn't heard it, how do we respond to Democrats who say that they tried to pass a border security bill? My response, ma'am, is I was there in the Senate when they tried to pass that border security bill, and it had nothing to do with border security. It had to do with codifying a lot of the executive orders of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden that actually further opened the southern border. For example, the policy of catch and release. This is where a person comes into our country, they claim asylum, and then they're released into our country with no follow-up. Sometimes they don't come back for 5 years, sometimes they don't come back for 10 years. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden implemented catch and release through executive order. Their so-called border security package would have made catch and release the law of the land. So even if you have a guy like Donald Trump come in, he can't undo it because Congress has codified one of the worst open border policies in America. Everybody knows, everybody with an ounce of common sense knows, when Kamala Harris became president, she said she wanted to, vice president, she said, I want to suspend deportations, and she did. I want to stop Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, and she did. The reason why we have an open border is because Kamala Harris undid the policies of Donald J. Trump. We bring Donald J. Trump back, we bring those policies back, we will get border security, but you've got to have a president who wants to do this stuff. Thank you all. Georgia? Yes, sir. Please ask a question.
Thank you, Senator. Our station is aware of how the former president has come through here this last interview with you now.
I don't think the microphone's on. It's okay. Just talk loud.
Sorry about that.
That's a Chinese-made microphone, actually. This is an American-made microphone. Well, first of all, why South Georgia? Because we love South Georgia, and we got to do well in South Georgia. So we want the people here to feel a little bit of love and make sure that we're thinking about them, because we're not going to win without them, right? But I do think what is unique about South Georgia and the effect of the policies of Kamala Harris is the wide open southern border, because you have that intersection of I-10 and I-75 here, very close by. It creates a lot of space for the drug traffickers and for the sex traffickers and the human traffickers. I mean, you have crime happening in this beautiful small town that would have never happened if Kamala Harris had actually done her job. And so I think that it's important to remind people that the wide open southern border has had a very direct consequences, even as far away from Texas as South Georgia. And I think it's important to remind people of that and to make the point that if we get the leadership of Donald J. Trump back, we're going to have a secure southern border. We're not going to have drugs in our kids' playgrounds that look like children's candy. We're going to have real law and order, but we've got to get better leadership in order to get it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, in the hat, all the way in the back.
What are your policies going to be toward veterans and the care for veterans?
Yes, sir. I appreciate you asking that. And you know, one of the most important, how many veterans do we have here? Let's thank the veterans for their service. Thank you all for being here. I know we got a lot of veterans. God bless you all. You know, one of the great policy achievements of the Trump administration that people don't talk enough about, but our veterans know exactly what I'm talking about, is that he promoted choice in the VA healthcare system. One of the main ways, when I got out of the Marine Corps, the main way that I had health care, because I couldn't afford it otherwise, was through the VA healthcare system. You've got great people working at the VA, but sometimes, especially in our rural areas, you've got a lot of veterans who are sitting on the phone for 3 hours trying to get an appointment, who can't get an appointment. Donald Trump changed that more than any president of my lifetime. He gave veterans choice in the healthcare system, and that was a huge achievement and something the media doesn't talk enough about. The other thing Donald Trump did is again, you've got 95% of the people in the VA who are great patriots, who are doing a great job, and I think my veterans here would back me up on that. But like every bunch, you've got a few bad apples. and you've got to be able to fire the bad apples to allow the good apples to do their job. And what Donald Trump did is engage in some real bureaucracy reform that made it possible for us to fire the small number of bad VA employees so that the good VA employees could be empowered to take care of our veterans. That's exactly how it should work, and Donald Trump deserves a lot of credit for that. We're going to go back to that, because I will say, did a veterans event in Pennsylvania just a couple of days ago, and the biggest complaint I heard from those veterans was that under Kamala Harris's policies, a lot of that pro-veteran, pro-choice reform had disappeared over the last couple of years. Let's bring it back, give veterans more choice, shorten those wait times, and actually keep our promise to our veterans as we must. Maddie, you got a question?
Yeah, I would just say, Senator, first off, thank you for actually taking questions.
Do you think that it's time for Governor Walz and Kamala Harris to actually do a press conference and do an interview with the media?
I think it's time. Don't you all? Look, it is such a cool thing to be able to run as Donald Trump's running mate and to be able to ask these wonderful people to be their vice president of the United States. It's an amazing honor. Aside from being a dad to those 3 babies and a husband to my wife, the greatest honor of my entire life is standing up here and being able to run to be the next vice president of the United States. But it is an awesome thing. It's not just a cool thing. It's not just a wonderful thing, though it is. I am asking you all for something that is quite profound. It's to be the vice president of the most powerful nation in the world at one of the most important times in our history. If you want to get that kind of job, and you're asking the American people to give you that kind of job, I think you ought to interview for that job, right? There are a lot of jobs that are less important than Vice President of the United States where we expect people to interview before they get a promotion. Kamala Harris is asking the American people for a promotion, but she refuses to actually talk to them before it. Think about it. Every single event that Kamala Harris does, she's got a teleprompter in front of her. And I think the reason is because Kamala Harris cannot explain why she wanted to defund the police. Kamala Harris can't explain why she suspended deportations on day 1. Kamala Harris can't explain why she cast the deciding vote on the Inflation Explosion Act that made the price of groceries and housing so expensive for normal American citizens all over this country. And because she can't answer those questions, she is running for the American people. But my ask, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you agree with Donald Trump on all the issues or most of the issues, or you disagree with him on most of the issues, is at least Donald Trump is who he is, and he respects the American people enough to go out and earn their vote instead of being expected to given their vote. We'll just do a couple more. Any other Georgia folks who haven't asked a question before we go on? We'll do a couple national. Sir.
Senator, the former lieutenant governor spoke at the DNC, had some choice words about the former president.
I saw that too.
We also know that Brian Kemp has also had some tough things to say about the former president. What's your reaction to these top Republicans from the state having reservations about the president and telling other Republicans to dump Trump?
Well, look, first of all, of course, Tim Walz is going to attack Donald Trump because Tim Walz doesn't have a record to stand on. What I found very interesting, did anybody watch Tim Walz's speech? Okay, good. I was going to lose a lot of respect for you if you had said yes. If you watched Tim Walz's speech, it's part of my job, so I had to. You know what he never did? He never once said, I know we've got some train noise in the background here, so I'll try to be loud, but he never, it's the Trump train. That's right, ma'am. God bless you. What Tim Walz never once said is, Kamala Harris accomplished this thing that lowered the cost of housing. Kamala Harris accomplished this thing that lowered the cost of groceries. Kamala Harris accomplished this thing that have made America more peaceful and more secure. And he couldn't say that because Kamala Harris has caused the very policies that have made Americans' lives worse over the last few years. Kamala Harris caused the open border and caused the inflation crisis. And so it is telling that a person who has been vice president for 3.5 years, her argument and the argument of her surrogates is, we're going to do things better when I get power. She's had power for 3.5 years and she's made everything worse. That is the most simple and obvious fact of Tim Walz's speech, is he can't run on a record because the record is bad. Now, look, I actually talked to Brian Kemp very briefly earlier today, and yeah, you know, I read the headlines. Brian Kemp and Donald Trump have had some disagreements. I am 100% guarantee you that Brian Kemp is behind this ticket. He wants us to win because he believes the policies of Kamala Harris are disastrous for this country, and he's exactly right about that. So I'm glad to have the governor's support. I'm glad to have any Democrat, any independent, any moderate Republican or conservative Republican. We want anybody who believes in common sense to join the Trump train because that's what's going to save this country. And we'll do one more question from the national folks. Anybody else want to ask a question? Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Senator. I wanted to ask you, because another aspect of the DNC speeches yesterday was the kind of human aspect of immigration. They had one of the DACA recipients speak. As a husband of someone who is a daughter of immigrants, how do you look at the deportation plan that Trump has will put in place?
Yeah.
Specifically, the detention of families and children.
Well, so let me say three things about this. First, I am married to the daughter of immigrants to this country. I'm married to the daughter of legal immigrants to this country, people who respected the country enough to follow the rules before they came. And I think that's very important. And look, I love my wife more than anything in this world. I am so grateful that her family came here, but I'm also grateful that they came here in the right way and built a life in this country the right way. That really matters. You can't reward people for breaking the laws. If their first act of introduction to this country is to break the law, you can't reward them for that, or you're just going to encourage more law breaking. So this is my second point. You hear Democrats say this a lot, and a couple speakers of the Democratic Convention say that Donald Trump wants to separate families. And I don't know how they can say that with a straight face, given that I just heard from a sheriff earlier today that they caught 2 kids who were being basically kidnapped by the Mexican drug cartels to help those drug cartels facilitate the sale of illegal drugs into our communities. What happened to those kids? Where are those kids' parents? I guarantee our government doesn't know, because our government, under the policies of Kamala Harris, has lost thousands of innocent children to sex trafficking, to drug trafficking, to human trafficking. The party that believes in separating parents from their children is Kamala Harris, because that's what the open border has done. It's separated American citizens from their children. It's separated a lot of illegal aliens from their children. It's not good either way. Because the one group of people that I think we can all agree, I don't blame these poor children who are being sex trafficked and drug trafficked by the Mexican drug cartels, but I don't want to pursue policies that's going to make it easier for the drug cartels to take advantage of those children. We ought to pursue policies that's going to make it harder on the drug cartels. Go to war against those drug cartels. Don't facilitate their sex trafficking and their drug trafficking. And the final point that I'd say about this is, look, our message to illegal aliens who've come into this country by breaking our laws is yes. If you came into this country illegally, Donald Trump and I are going to work to send you home, because that's what is required if you want to have a real border policy. And our message to everybody who wants to come to this country is come through the right channels, because as soon as Kamala Harris is booted out of office, and it's going to happen in just a few short months, as soon as Kamala Harris is booted out of office, we are not open for business to illegal aliens or to the Mexican drug cartels anymore. That is our solemn promise to the American people, and we are very serious about it. So since that's the last question from the press, and I know we have to get on the road here, let me just say a word of gratitude to all of you and to our law enforcement. We really believe in what you do. We believe that your work is sacred and important. We are grateful to you for doing it. We're grateful to you for putting your lives on the line to make us safe. And in just a few short months, President Donald J. Trump is going to make your life easier, not harder. God bless you guys. Let's work to get it done. Thank you all, and good to see you.